Thriving in today's fast-paced world of change and disruption requires innovation. Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast that explores the ins and outs of innovation with raw stories, real insights, and practical advice from the best and brightest in the world of startups and innovation. Each week, we'll bring you the latest ideas in lean startup, design thinking, corporate venture capital, and more. Now, let's get started.
All right, thank you, and welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. We've got a couple of great guests, Neil, Soni, and Chaz Giles, who are the global heads of external innovation at Estée Lauder Companies. And we wanted to jump in on a conversation and find out a little bit. You've been spending the last year or so focused on external innovation within Estée. Talk a little bit about, so did you have a clean sheet of paper to start with for Estée, or were there other efforts that came into play and then this is like an evolution of their innovation efforts?
I would say this is definitely an evolution. So, this is Chaz speaking. They have a long history of, kind of partnering and building with partners and looking both at the great creativity they have inside and the, innovation and creativity that happens outside. I think what, the work that we really came in to do was to kind of help progress that and, take one step that's kind of a linear evolution and then take a big step change into, how we think about some of those partnerships. And so, a lot of that was to come in and help bring some of the VC discipline and some of the entrepreneurial spirit and focus to that kind of work we were doing. And then another part of it was to kind of bring in a different perspective around, what innovation looks like in the Valley and, how we can tap into some new ecosystems for where innovation is happening and, how we can kind of drive mutual value, not just to, for Estée Lauder, but for all the companies and entrepreneurs that we want to partner with and work with as well.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, I would say one of the biggest things that we've seen, startups are very appreciative of, is when, we come into it, since, as Chaz said, we've been on kind of all sides of this table, we kind of come into it with looking for how to create a win-win deal, as opposed to, a lot of times a big company will come in kind of oblivious to the challenges that a startup is facing. So, for example, if a startup is coming in and they're talking about, either an investment or a big, kind of enterprise deal, probably something that's going to make up the bulk of their revenue, or they have a choice of going to go raise their next round. Those things have time limits on there, right? I mean, there's a burn rate, there's a cash reserve, right, that is going to run out if you stall the deal out for too long. So I think it's helped the companies we've worked with, and I think it's also helped Estée Lauder in that we're empathetic to the challenges that the startups face, and because of that, it helps our inbound quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Maybe take a step back and kind of walk through the actual how Estée's external innovation is structured, kind of how has it evolved, and how did you get to where you're at today?
A lot of what we really have looked to build was to really understand the uniqueness of the culture of Estée Lauder. And I think having, done strategic VC at Citi and watched the integration of some of those investments into the business units to be able to drive, kind of some of the pilots and commercializations, and then having done some of this, on an enterprise sales side within, being a founder, I think what we were very acutely aware of was, oftentimes the opportunities are great, right? But it's about finding the right champions and making sure that the right decisions can be made and that there is the kind of streamlined process that allows a startup that's, literally looking at milestones on a weekly, if not more frequent basis, to interact with a bigger company that, typically is looking at milestones that if they're moving fast, they're on a quarterly basis for a lot of the milestones, right? And in that cycle time, those difference in cycle times can be a big challenge. So a lot of what we wanted to do was kind of take and evolve the thinking and the work to be, how can we structure the work and processes that we have internally to mirror how our partners would be thinking about their business, right? So how can we have a much faster and responsive, set of decisions? How can we get to a pilot and get to proof of concept and validation that allows everyone to get data on the table and de-risk the situation instead of, having the PowerPoint discussions ad nauseum, right? That happens in a lot of big companies. So I think, it was as much about bringing a similar kind of structure that would, exist as you think about the top of the funnel, a pipeline, your diligence process from an investing perspective, and kind of marrying that with the iterations and kind of a lean methodology that startups are approaching, and putting that in a place that says, okay, if this is how we want to partner, here's the strategic areas that we're really focused on. We need to do our scouting similar to how I would do it when I was investing, and then we need to think about our pilots and our interactions and kind of proof of concept work with these companies in the same way that we would think about it if we were founders, right? Like, what are the 2 or 3 things that are absolutely critical in solving this? And the other questions can honestly wait for a little bit, right? And I think, companies and corporations fall into the activity systems that happen in a natural rhythm, and can sometimes stray away from like, what are the true 2 or 3 killer issues that have to be answered to be able to validate something, to be able to move to the next step. Because in these early stage upstream and some of these breakthrough pieces, like, we're not going to have all the answers, and we have to be comfortable with having a bit of that ambiguity in the system.
So corporations can obviously do external innovation in a number of different ways, and we've seen a lot of different models out there. Companies that are spinning out hackathons or creating an accelerator, or kind of doing this matchmaking kind of service, or just external partner B&D kind of stuff. What are some of the things that you've seen out there in the marketplace, and what are some of the things that you've liked or disliked about what's been seen in the startup-driven innovation space?
So I think there's a lot of noise out there, right? There's like a lot of what Chaz and I call buzzword bingo. Where there are like hackathons, there's accelerators, there's incubators, there's this, there's that, there's lean. I mean, just you name it, right? Whatever the Silicon Valley buzzword is, there's a corporate innovation initiative around it. I think a lot of it, to be honest, a lot of it feels like ways that people are just trying to look at big companies as like ATMs. And trying to extract money. I mean, to be completely honest, that's what I see a lot of efforts out there like that. There are, I mean, that said, there's some that are pretty good. I mean, I think the ones that speak to specific problem areas are obviously much better than just like, hey, we'll give you an accelerator, right? Like, those don't feel like they're contributing that much value. Yeah, I think that's the key, right? It's just like, if it actually is solving a problem, which requires an understanding of what the company is actually facing, instead of just spitting something at a big company.
Yeah, and I think I'd build on that a little bit and say, I think a lot of corporations right now, they're experimenting, right? Fundamentally, the model of innovation has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. Everything that we've seen in the tech hotspots is kind of indicating how fast startups can come out. There's been a flood of capital, though that spigot is kind of slowly drying up a little bit at the moment. And so I think corporations are trying to react, right? And so they're seeing competition start to disaggregate their models, and what used to be a big advantage of scale and size is now becoming slightly disadvantageous in their ability to react, their ability to really truly master the new channels of communication that consumers are using to be able to drive sales. And so I think in that, what you're seeing is pendulum swing really, really far to one side, which is people saying, CEOs, chief innovation officers sitting and saying, look, we have to figure these things out, and people throwing a lot of bodies and a lot of money at solutions that may or may not be appropriate for them. So I think what, the way that we've really thought about it, and we've, kind of helped several companies think about this, kind of throughout our career, and I think what we're seeing is, whether it's an accelerator, an incubator, whether it's, strategic venture capital, a matchmaking service, as you said, open innovation challenges that are issued, all of those are tools, right? It's effectively, you're an archer and there are arrows in your quiver, and what you're trying to figure out is, how can you be as accurate and as efficient as possible in kind of achieving your innovation goal? And I think a lot of companies haven't really thought about these specific programs or tools or offerings as a holistic offering that they have to the outside or to their innovation resources. And I think when that starts to happen, they're going to see better results, right? It's going to get closer to what venture investing looks like. It's going to get closer to the way that startups run with, there is a set of strategic objectives. There are going to be a series of tests that we're going to employ. There's going to be a diligence process. We're going to wean that down, and we're going to find, the few nuggets that are really there, and then we're going to double down on those. And whether it's I'm putting equity investments in a $50,000 slug in an early stage, or whether it's I'm giving space and resources in kind to help something incubate, all of those things are getting me closer toward what my end goal is. And I think it's the integration of all of those efforts that will pay big dividends for companies as they go forward. I think the other thing that's there that isn't being addressed too much today is really that cultural challenge for how do you plug in once you've found something? And so, as we talk to people, whether that's, inside Estée Lauder or whether that's kind of in our travels, what we hear is like, we see really, really interesting ideas, and there's companies that are really exciting. And then to bridge that gap from, we have some relationship and, there was an accelerator program and this company came out at the top of the class. But what does the corporation then go do? Mm-hmm. How do they have those flexible systems that can allow that small company to participate with the large company and not get squished along the way, right? And still bring all the things that they saw in that company that were so valuable and bring those to the party. And I think that's where that evolution has to happen now. So it's like, great, you made an investment. Now what, right? How do you actually drive value from that on both sides of the table? Because I think it's been very one-sided. Either companies go super hands-off and they basically are investing and then they look like financial investors, which can be fine, except most of their charters aren't financial investment charters, right? They're strategic investment charters. Right. And so they have to figure out how to bridge that, and vice versa for the companies too, right? A lot of the startups haven't figured out how to work with the big companies in a way that, they can still maintain some of their autonomy and be a startup, but also figure out, what this new relationship can offer and be better than what they could have done on their own.
Right, for sure. So, go ahead, Neil.
Sorry, just to elaborate on one of the things there that Chaz said in the beginning of that, I think one of the fundamental differences that's happening right now, one of the evolution that's happening, is companies are starting to realize that innovation is not just something that's tasked to R&D or an innovation group or whatever it's called. They're thinking about it as I use a metaphor that's I call it a web, right? So there's a node of the web is your R&D group, right? And there's certain things that your R&D group can probably do better than anyone else in the world. Mm-hmm. Then there's a node that it could be Silicon Valley startups, right? And that there's certain things that you're going to find in that node of the web, right? That are going to bring in certain types of innovation or can bring in breakthroughs. Then there's some that might be university partnerships. Then there might be some which are research labs. So there's a kind of a web of different innovation players in different parts of the ecosystem, and each of those things is contributing, and you don't know where the next breakthrough is coming from. So I think companies are starting to get to this place where they're going to build this kind of web-like approach to their innovation system.
Yeah, I like the idea of a portfolio approach where you really are trying to understand which of my resources are going into Horizon 1, 2, or 3 types of initiatives. What are my outcomes? Am I doing this for cultural reasons to get my folks more entrepreneurial thinking, or am I doing it for direct financial benefit or whatever the case may be?
Or is it PR, or is it
exactly.
What is the yep.
So what are some of the, expectations that have changed over the last year or so, or what's changed in the marketplace that you've seen with regard to this space?
I think the biggest shift right now is actually just what's happening on the VC side. So as people start to get a little more bearish and turn the coffers off a little bit, and that obviously their startups, portfolio companies, and some of the new ones coming into the market, they have a different set of expectations, whether that's valuations are changing or whether that's they're looking to move into a realm that drives more revenue and profitability. I think there's just definitely a mindset shift right now among kind of the external community that's changing the role that strategics are playing, the importance of some of these relationships, and I think it will continue to change over the next couple years for the role that corporations play in the innovation ecosystem, because as access to capital thins out a bit, There needs to be different ways that companies can get out into the market, can test, can pilot, and kind of get to their proof of concepts. And I think there will be some more of these interactions that you see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's actually a big benefit for strategic players on the corporate innovation side. Startup companies have to optimize for revenue, I think, or they will have to optimize for revenue a little earlier than they were before, which I think opens up a lot of really cool opportunities for bridging the gaps between both sides.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think some of those, the other one that I would add in there is I think the kind of continual change, especially in the space that we play. So, obviously the changing environment in retail and commerce, over the last year has continued to evolve super rapidly. And so as companies look at that both, in the US and globally, I think the consumer dynamic of what and how they're informed, what and how they're, entertained and how that drives the commerce, I think is one that we continue to watch very, very closely. And I think more and more companies are popping up there, and more corporations are, really experimenting to, understand what the shift means, the continued shift from bricks and mortars to digital to mobile to, kind of the increasing, call it availability, as well as interest in VR and the role that plays in different places. All of those kind of pieces are continuing to really reshape the retail landscape. And for companies like, Estée Lauder and others, that's obviously critical for us to be part of.
For sure.
Yeah, and something I've been hearing anecdotally and something we've had some internal conversations around too, and like every company, is some of the breaking down of the barriers, of kind of these artificial channel barriers, right? So you traditionally have like internet separate from bricks and mortar, separate from mobile, right? Like, so everything is kind of siloed, and obviously consumers don't think in that siloed fashion, right? So I think that's something we're going to see more and more as companies starting to think of their consumer as a overarching consumer experience, as opposed to channel-based silos.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one last question. A lot of our audience is kind of new to the space and trying to understand, and like you said, kind of weave their way and experiment and trying to understand what they should be doing on that. What are some either resources or kind of key words of wisdom for those newbies into the space that they should take away, or anything that you've learned in the last year or two that you say definitely do this, definitely don't do that?
That's a big question right there. I think I would say the biggest advice I would give, someone stepping into some of the corporate innovation pieces, having done it a couple of times, is really spend time, especially if you're going to be in the ecosystem, right? So if it's not just an internally focused effort, really spend time understanding the motivations, the pain points, the fears, the hopes, the dreams, whatever you want to call it, of the other partners, right? Like, understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of the VCs, understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of the founders and entrepreneurs that you work with, because I think if you can understand that, it gives a very new perspective on where and how you can be valuable and helpful in the ecosystem. And if you can be valuable and helpful, there will be no lack of opportunities. And then I think the second part of that is do a similar set of, empathetic understanding for the culture of your organization, for the needs of your business units, the needs of, the strategic leaders within the organization, and then figure out how you can stitch those two together. Because I think that's really where the magic comes, is, the deep understanding of what's happening, the need states, the pain points on the outside and the inside, and playing that kind of translation role to bring new solutions together, to bring kind of those intersection points and match those for the companies.
Fantastic.
Nice. Yeah, I would say from my side, something I'm still learning how to do a little bit is not even a little bit, a lot, is to be patient. So coming from the startup side, right? So if anyone who's entering the corporate side from startup world, or is interacting with kind of a corporate innovation group, just know like the timelines are very different from startup world, and that's something, I'm sure I rubbed some people the wrong way when I first started at Estée Lauder, because startup timeline, you're like, as Chaz said, you're reevaluating metrics on a weekly, if not daily basis. You're checking in and you're making sure, you're benchmarking, like if revenue falls below a certain number, right, on a given hour, you're like looking at that. So, that's just not the pace of corporate world, and that's because of, I think a lot of the stakeholders, and it's just, the scale is just a whole nother level. So, for me, that was a big learning curve, was just the timelines, understanding how to get buy-in from, 20 stakeholders, right, in a project, as opposed to, I turn to the left and there's Chaz, and that's the only person's buy-in I need to go do something, right, in the startup side. So it's just very different in terms of how you get something across the finish line, and then also how you understand the timings for how long something is going to take.
That's cool.
And I would add, and I think the final piece, and you guys are helping in this, right, with having podcasts like this and things like that. But I would just say I'd encourage people to really talk to people in the ecosystem. There's a lot of people like myself that have taken scars for quite a few years on some of these different pieces, and the work we do is fun. And it's great to see people that are really coming in and thinking about innovation in different ways, and how to kind of remove some of the silos that have kind of existed within innovation between bigger companies and smaller companies. So I just encourage people to reach out to different people and sit and grab some coffee and have some of these conversations with thought leaders in the space, because I think it's invaluable.
Sounds
great.
And
we're totally, we're always interested in talking to people, whether on the startup side or on the VC or accelerator side or in the corporate innovation side, just to learn, see what they're seeing, and just see how we can be helpful.
So Neil and Chaz, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and have further conversations, what's the best way to do that?
Certainly. So I think there's a couple ways they can find us on LinkedIn. So it's Chaz.Giles is my LinkedIn, and Neil.Soni is his. You can also find us in our at a website called intrapreneur.co with an I, so intrapreneur.co for the internal innovation. We love to talk to different people in the ecosystem and just continue to stay on top of what's out there.
Fantastic. Well, that's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Special thanks to our guests for being on the show this week. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so please do reach out and talk to us on Twitter at the IO Podcast. Visit us online at insideoutside.io. And if you have 30 seconds, go over to iTunes, leave a review, and you can subscribe there as well. We'd love to hear from you, and until next time, go out and innovate.